Age of Empires is back with the fourth entry in the series that will continue the real-time strategy favorite and put you in the midst of epic historical battles. I'm Alex Stedman, and joining me today are creative director Adam Isgreen and game director Quinn Duffy to chat all about this Gamescom reveal. Hey, you two, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm good.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so tell us, what are you showing off today that we haven't seen before with Age of Empires 4?
Quinn, why don't you start?
Well, a couple of new civs and some of our sort of storytelling narrative devices, this hands-on history, a little bit about the campaign on the Rise of Moscow. So lots of stuff going on today. And obviously we're getting ready for the launch coming up soon, and there's a lot of stuff to show.
Yeah, it's been an incredible ride, honestly. Just getting the game ready for the last several years and finally be able to show everyone what we've been working on and kind of the overall picture of it. You know, the campaign approach with all of the kind of real world and kind of computer animation overlaid into it, and the way that we talk about everything from armor making to catapults to everything else that's all intermixed into it. It's just been a fantastic experience. It's great to finally be able to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm super excited to talk about it. And so what can you tell us about the Rus? How did they play differently from the other factions?
Well, I'll start. I mean, one of my favorite things with the Rus is I kind of almost call them the wilderness civ, and that's because they have a lot of advantages to actually going and scouting the map and building around the map, but not their towns per se, but these hunting cabins that give them all kinds of resources from spreading out and expanding and then controlling that territory. And in addition to that, you know, we mentioned hunting. They're a really powerful civ in that they get gold rewards just for going and killing and hunting all of the wildlife on the maps. And so there's really early strategies with the Rus that you have to really kind of rush out there and try to get as much wildlife as you can just for because you're fur trading essentially and getting the gold for those furs and for those skins, and then bringing them back to your base in order to get the food as well. So it's a really great change up for early strategies compared to the other civilizations.
Yeah, they've got some really cool, unique units too. The warrior monks, and these are monks that can do more than just heal. They can actually fight in battle and inspire the troops around them in combat. And that's built upon some of the historical research that we did on the Rus and the Muscovites. And they've got sort of the beginnings of the first kind of standing army. They're late game units, these Streltsy with muskets and these fantastic axes. They're really spectacular to play with and a lot of fun, and make the Civ feel very different from the other ones.
Absolutely, and I also wanted to talk about the Holy Roman Empire. Since the Empire is another Western European faction with knights and castles, how do you make them feel different from the French and the English?
Lots of changes. I mean, you know, architecturally, they're completely different. You know, like just a completely unique look for the Holy Roman Empire. But the thing that really stands apart for them is, you know, each of the Western European civs kind of has their own flavor in terms of what they focus on. You know, the English have their longbows, the French have their knights. For the Holy Roman Empire, they really focus on heavy armor and defense. They're very like build a big city and build it tightly and get a lot of play out of being able to just be sturdier than everybody else. But they also have some incredible units like the Landsknecht, which is this, you know, two-handed sword wielding unit that can rush into combat and can hit multiple units at once. So they can just clear what we call, you know, in the Age world, trash units so quickly and just make space for your advances on your opponents.
Yeah, the beta players are already calling them land sharks. They have a hard to pronounce German name, and but they're a lot of fun to see used in big numbers. They're sword swinging, and they just kind of cleave through lightly armored units. They're really spectacular looking. And the Holy Roman Empire also builds upon the concept of religion. They have these prelate units, sort of like early monks that can inspire their villagers and can improve gathering and get their economy going more quickly. So all of these civs have different ways to move through the early ages in the game and gives them that variety that we were looking for.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited about the sound of land sharks, so that'll be fun. But what will the players be doing in the Rise of Moscow campaign? Is it a typical RTS base building kind of thing, or might we see some new surprises?
Well, I think one of the fun things about the Rise of Moscow campaign is that Moscow got beaten up a lot throughout history, and they kept rebuilding the city. And I think one of the fun things in the campaign is that you keep coming back to the city throughout the campaign as you're playing it, but yet every time you have to do something different because yet something again is threatening the city. And how you build it and how you build it up over time is really kind of neat, and how it plays out across the campaigns.
Yeah, all of the campaigns kind of have a theme, and Moscow was this, following the city from its beginnings as a little fort, obscure town on the Moscow River, up to this superpower, and how they grew and expanded their empire, and that's kind of the narrative that you're going to follow through the campaign, and so the missions typify some of the key points in the history of the Rus and especially the city of Moscow.
Right, right. And what unique units will players have access to with these new factions, and what can they do on the battlefield?
Well, we already talked about the land shark, right? The
Right.
land sharks are kind of like for the Holy Roman Empire are a great unit to be able to kind of run in there and really like mow down and clear for your other units to be able to move in. Like Quinn mentioned, we've also got the deacons. They're really great, and we've got warrior monks that can fight. So there's a lot of really crazy. I'll let Quinn go into it. He's more detail oriented than I am when it comes to unit descriptions.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about the new civs is, like you touched on, you've got a civ that on paper looks more traditional, more Western, more knights and castles, but you've got all these various ways of improving your infantry and boosting your armor and your defense, and just making the Holy Roman Empire feel like a real tanky, sort of slugger civ. And the Rus, on the other hand, they really bridge the gap between East and West. They, historically they borrowed from the East with their cavalry and their horse archers and their hit and run tactics, and then they borrowed from the West to build defenses and castles and artillery and things that gave them an advantage over, say, the Mongols later in their history. So they're a really unique civ in that they kind of blend the best of East and West and have a really interesting, unique character.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of on that note, I did want to ask, naval combat is going to be returning, but some of the factions like the Holy Roman Empire and the Mongols didn't really do a lot of naval warfare. So will those factions have their own naval units as well?
Oh yeah, yeah. All of the civilizations in the game will have naval units, but they change things up a little bit. Like the Rus had a lot of rivers. They didn't have a lot of, say, seagoing vessels, but they used a lot of river transports. And so their ships are built around kind of a different type of ship than you'd see in the West. And it's something that they can adapt to the situation and change the role of the ship. And so their navy is more inspired by the history and the geography of the Rus.
Yeah, they have a very flexible navy that they can repurpose their ships to do different things as the need arises, whereas other civilizations kind of have to build specific ships for specific roles in combat.
Right, right. Totally makes sense. And are you going to model some of the, kind of internal political divisions and the complex government structure in the Holy Roman Empire with any specific mechanics?
We looked into that at the beginning because they have a very interesting and very complex history and government. But I think that ends up being a bit much for a real-time strategy. So we sort of focus on the things that make them, I think, really stand out and make them, we try and build on the big, interesting gameplay elements of history, and creating gameplay around history is something that's really interesting to do, and how much you take and how much you leave is kind of a fine balancing act. So we know they have a very interesting and very complex history, and we'll cover some of those elements in mechanics, especially around the way they kind of use influence and the way they build cities and so on. But it's a bit abstracted from the strange politics of the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah, you would have to build a whole game specifically around politics and like the machinations of all the different factions in order to really make that play up. And in the middle of combat and battling a war and building a city, it would probably be too much for players for this specific game.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And speaking of history, the Rus actually underwent a conversion from pagan to Orthodox Christian during this time period. So will that factor into the campaign or even the mechanics the Rus get to access during the different ages?
That's a great question. Well, one thing that's really neat is how the music changes over time. And what we've tried to do with the games, with the civilizations, is as our civs were influenced through all these different means, like religion, combat, trade. How did that change their? How did that come out, right? And some of that came out in the music. So as you go through the ages with these different civilizations, you're going to hear more of the influences that were put onto them as you age up. So one of the things that we've had a lot of fun with is not only language, but music changes as you age up through the game and play the game. And so you can hear some of those influences if they came into those things like music. You get to experience them through the course of the play.
Nice. And you guys have described the English as being the faction that will be the most familiar to Age of Empires players, while the Mongols are a little more out there. So where do the Rus and the Holy Roman Empire fall on that scale?
Yeah, that's a good question. We did have kind of a chart, that sort of, I don't know, like a bell curve of where the civilizations would sort of fit, or where we thought they would sort of fit at the time. And there are certainly things in the Holy Roman Empire that would feel familiar to English players. Some of the units. The Rus are really interesting in that sort of blend between East and West. They're not maybe quite as unique as the Mongols, but they're definitely further apart from, say, the Western civs.
Right. And with all the launch factions revealed, we still don't have one based in Africa. Is that something you'd like to add in the future?
Absolutely. We do, though. Yeah, we're closer, right, with the Abbasid, but we're not there yet. But that's absolutely an area that we'll definitely be looking for additions. We have a lot of plans for civilizations that we can add to Age of Empires 4. And so we're going to be looking all over the place to find one. But Africa is a great contender for a civilization sometime in the near future.
All right, guys. Well, the game is definitely looking amazing, and it's one we can't wait to see more of. Age of Empires 4 releases on PC on October 28th, 2021. Thanks so much again, guys, for stopping by.